Today we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. As always, viewer discretion is advised. February 2nd, 2005. Tom Gilliland, Pete Fine, and Bruce Lynn drove 90 minutes from Tucson to explore Waterman Mountain Bat Cave, a recently discovered cave in the Arizona desert. They parked at the base and began organizing their gear. While Fine and Lynn readied their equipment, Gilliland decided to hike up ahead. The approach was only a few hundred yards, but gained about 200 feet, 61 meters of elevation. The limestone was razor sharp, cacti dotted the slope, and sparse brush offered no handholds. Gilliland picked his way up carefully, breathing hard in the dry air. He crossed a ridge and the cave entrance came into view. A dark opening in the limestone face, large enough to walk through. Gilliland reached the entrance and stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. The temperature dropped immediately, the cave's constant cool air a relief from the desert heat. He moved deeper into the entrance passage. The floor rose ahead, where loose rocks had accumulated, creating a small climb about 3 to 4 feet, 0.9 to 1.2 meters high. To continue deeper into the cave, he'd need to navigate past these rocks. Gilliland began climbing up the loose rock pile. The rocks shifted slightly under his weight, but held. As he reached the top of the climb, he noticed some rocks were particularly loose and protruding awkwardly. Without thinking much about it, he decided to move them aside, perhaps to make the passage easier for Fine and Lynn when they arrived, or simply because they seemed in the way. He grabbed one of the rocks and pulled it away from the pile. Behind the rocks, hidden in a shadowed recess, was a massive hive of Africanized honeybees. The response was instantaneous. A swarm erupted from behind the disturbed rocks, thousands of bees pouring out in a dark, buzzing cloud. The sound was overwhelming, drowning out everything else. Within seconds, the first stings hit. Africanized bees don't sting once and retreat. They attack in mass, targeting any perceived threat to their colony. Dozens of stings hit Gilliland's face, neck, and arms. The pain was intense and immediate, sharp burning sensations multiplying across his skin. Gilliland scrambled backward off the rock pile and ran for the entrance. The swarm pursued. He burst out of the cave and ran back over the ridge, the bees following relentlessly. Killer bees are notorious for chasing threats for hundreds of yards, sometimes over a quarter mile. He ran down the slope, suffering more stings as the swarm kept pace. After about 50 yards, 46 meters, the terrain forced him to navigate a climb down at a ledge. It wasn't a sheer drop, but it required controlled movement, careful foot and hand placement. The kind of climbing where you need to think about each move. Gilliland had no time to think. The bees were still attacking, still stinging. He was stung again at the ledge, the pain and panic overwhelming any careful consideration of the terrain. He attempted to run down the climb down, trying to maintain speed despite the technical nature of the descent. It was a catastrophic mistake. His foot slipped on the sharp limestone. His balance failed. Suddenly he was tumbling, his body careening off the razor-sharp rocks, completely out of control. The fall lasted only seconds, but in that time, the desert limestone tore into him. It was brutal. His left knee took a devastating impact, the sharp rock gashing through skin and into tissue. His hip slammed against the stone. His hands and arms scraped across the abrasive surface as he tried instinctively to break his fall, the limestone shredding skin like sandpaper. He tumbled and bounced until finally coming to rest at the bottom of the descent. Dazed and injured, Gilliland tried to assess the damage. Pain radiated from multiple points on his body. His knee was gashed and bleeding profusely. His hands and arms were lacerated and raw. But there was something else, something visibly horrifyingly wrong with his right hand. His ring finger was dislocated, sticking out from his hand at a 90-degree angle. The joint had been forced out of position during the fall, the finger now jutting sideways in a way that fingers aren't meant to bend. The sight of his own finger protruding at that unnatural angle must have been shocking, even through the pain and adrenaline of the moment. Gilliland knew he'd needed to reset the finger. Leaving it dislocated would cause additional damage and make treatment more complicated. With his other hand, he gripped the misaligned finger and pulled, manipulating it back into proper position. The pain of resetting a dislocated joint is intense, grinding bone against bone, forcing traumatized tissue back into alignment. But it had to be done. As he completed this grisly self-treatment, the bees found him again. More stings hit his already traumatized body. The swarm had followed him down the mountain, still pursuing what they perceived as a threat to their hive. Gilliland forced himself to his feet and ran again, despite the injury to his knee, despite the pain radiating from every part of his body. He managed another 50 yards, 46 meters, before encountering Fine and Lynn coming up the hill. The two men were shocked by what they saw. Their companion bleeding from multiple wounds, covered in welts from bee stings, limping badly, clearly in severe distress. There was no time for detailed explanations. All three immediately turned and continued quickly down the hill toward their vehicle. The priority was distance, getting away from the bees, getting to safety, getting medical help. Lynn, a professional firefighter with emergency medical training, took charge once they reached the car. He examined Gilliland's worst injury, the gashed knee that was bleeding heavily. Using water from their supplies, Lynn rinsed the wound, trying to remove dirt and debris from the laceration. The cut was deep, serious enough to require immediate professional treatment. Lynn grabbed the cleanest material available, a clean sock, and used it as an improvised bandage, wrapping it tightly around the knee to control the bleeding. With Gilliland bandaged and loaded into the vehicle, Lynn began the drive to the nearest emergency room, approximately an hour away. It was a long hour. Gilliland sat in the car cataloging his injuries, the adrenaline beginning to wear off, the full extent of the damage becoming clear. The bee stings covered his exposed skin. His knee was severely lacerated, his hands and arms were shredded from the sharp limestone. His right thumb was broken. 2 of his fingers were broken. Scratches and bruises covered the rest of his body. The emergency room assessment confirmed what Gilliland already knew. He had suffered significant trauma. The bee stings alone could have been life-threatening if he'd been allergic, or if he'd received enough stings to cause systemic toxicity. The fall injuries required extensive treatment, cleaning and suturing the lacerations, setting and splinting the broken bones, treating the numerous abrasions and contusions. In the aftermath, as Gilliland recovered from his injuries, he learned a disturbing fact. The cave, Waterman Mountain Bat Cave, was known to a few other cave explorers to contain killer bees. This information had been documented. Others had encountered the hive and recognized the danger. But due to what some Arizona spelunkers called a cave secrecy ethic, a practice of not sharing cave locations or information to protect caves from vandalism and overuse, this critical safety information had never been made available to the broader caving community. The secrecy that might protect a cave from damage had nearly killed Gilliland. If he had known about the bees, he never would have approached the entrance. If Fine and Lynn had known, they could have warned him before he hiked up alone. The information that could have prevented his injuries existed, but the culture of secrecy had kept it locked away in the knowledge of a select few. Gilliland's injuries healed over time. The lacerations closed. The broken bones knit back together. The bee stings faded. But his statement after the incident highlighted a troubling reality in the caving community. Sometimes cave secrecy has serious safety consequences. The cave entrance at Waterman Mountain still houses the killer beehive. The sharp limestone still threatens anyone who falls. The approach hike still climbs 200 feet, 61 meters, through treacherous desert terrain. But the lesson remains. Moving rocks without knowing what lies behind them can unleash consequences that turn a routine cave visit into a fight for survival on a mountainside, pursued by thousands of aggressive bees while bleeding from multiple wounds. Cave exploration carries inherent risks: rockfall, bad air, navigation errors. But some risks are preventable when critical safety information is shared, rather than hidden behind walls of secrecy that protect caves at the expense of the people who explore them. October 4th, 1982. 8 teenagers stood at the Lips entrance of Organ Cave in West Virginia, flashlights in hand, ready for an afternoon of exploration. Organ Cave is one of West Virginia's largest cave systems, stretching over 45 miles through the limestone beneath Greenbrier County. The cave has multiple entrances, commercial tours in certain sections, and vast wilderness areas that draw explorers seeking adventure in its labyrinthine passages. The Lippy's entrance provides access to some of the more remote sections of the system, areas with names like Hell's Fissure, the Maze, Skid Row, and the Sand Floor Room. These weren't tourist routes. These were raw cave passages requiring navigation skills, proper equipment, and careful planning. The group of 8, all in their late teens, entered through the Lips entrance on Sunday afternoon. Their plan was straightforward: explore into Hell's Fissure, a dramatic feature that drew cavers with its imposing geology, then return and perhaps check out some other passages before heading back to the surface. They ventured into Hell's Fissure. After exploring the area, they turned back upstream. At some point, whether by curiosity or navigation error, they wandered into an area known as the Maze. The name was apt. The maze consisted of a complex tangle of passages, interconnecting in ways that could confuse even experienced cave explorers. It was here, deep in the maze, that disaster struck. One by one, the flashlights began to fail. Batteries died, bulbs dimmed and went dark. The teenagers found themselves in a situation that every spelunker dreads: losing light in an underground environment where darkness is absolute. They checked their equipment desperately. How many lights still worked? The answer was devastating: 2. Out of 8 people, only 2 flashlights still functioned, and they had no backup lights. The group made a decision born of desperation. 2 of them, presumably those whose lights still worked, would continue forward, trying to find a way out or reach a known landmark where they could get help. The other 6 would stay put in the maze, conserving the little light they had left, waiting for rescue. The pair with functioning flashlights moved through the cave system with purpose. They navigated through the maze, descended Skid Row, climbed up Jones Canyon, passed through the breezeway, traversed the left-hand passage, entered the Handley Room, ascended Handley Silo, and finally reached the Sand Floor Room. Having traveled this far into the system, they retraced their route to the Handley Room, where they knew a cave register was located. Cave registers, logbooks where cave explorers sign in and out, recording their routes and expected exit times, serve as crucial safety tools. The pair settled in near the register to wait. At least if rescuers came looking, they'd likely check the register and find them there. Back in the maze, the remaining 6 faced a deteriorating situation. They had managed to keep one light working, a cigarette lighter. The small flame provided minimal illumination, just enough to see each other's faces in the darkness, just enough to maintain some psychological connection to the visible world. But a lighter provides no real light for navigation, and its fuel wouldn't last indefinitely. The temperature in the cave remained constant year-round, somewhere in the low to mid-50s Fahrenheit, about 12 to 14 degrees Celsius. On the surface, that might seem mild, but underground that temperature becomes dangerously cold. One member of the group faced an additional crisis. He was diabetic, and as hours passed without food, his blood sugar levels began to drop. The symptoms started subtly: slight dizziness, difficulty concentrating, but gradually worsened. In the cold and darkness, with no way to properly manage his condition, he grew increasingly woozy. His companions could do nothing but stay with him, monitor him through touch and voice in the darkness, and hope rescue would arrive before his condition became critical. Time lost all meaning in the absolute darkness. Minutes felt like hours. Hours stretched endlessly. The group had no way to track time passing. They could only sit in the cold, in the dark, listening to each other's breathing, feeling the damp stone around them, wondering if anyone had realized they were missing yet, wondering if help was coming, wondering if they would die here. Sunday evening arrived on the surface, and the 8 teenagers failed to emerge from the cave. Realizing something was wrong, their family members and friends summoned help. Jerry Kyle received the notification Sunday night. Kyle was an experienced explorer familiar with Organ Cave's complex layout. He quickly assembled 2 other volunteers, and the 3 of them entered the cave to conduct a search. They had a significant advantage. They knew the cave system and could make educated guesses about where lost cave explorers might end up. The maze was the obvious place to check first. It was a known problem area where people could become disoriented. Kyle and his team made their way to the maze and began searching. In the darkness, they called out, listening for responses. Eventually, their lights illuminated 6 figures huddled together in the passage. When the rescuers' lights appeared, the relief must have been overwhelming. They were found. They would get out. The nightmare was ending. But the nightmare wasn't over for everyone. The rescuers quickly assessed the situation. 6 cave explorers accounted for, but the group had entered as 8. Where were the other 2? The 6 explained that 2 had left with working flashlights, trying to find help or reach a known area. But they had no idea exactly where those 2 had gone or how far they had traveled into the cave system. The maze was just the starting point. From there, dozens of passages led in different directions, and without knowing the pair's route, searching became exponentially more difficult. Kyle and his team got the 6 moving toward the exit. The diabetic member was woozy, but able to walk with assistance. After hours in the cold, all 6 were hypothermic to varying degrees, shivering, stiff, exhausted, but mobile. The rescuers guided them through the passages they had been unable to navigate in darkness, back toward the lip's entrance and the surface. Once the 6 were safely out, Kyle and his team exited to regroup and call for additional manpower. 2 people were still missing somewhere in the extensive cave system, and finding them would require an expanded search effort. Additional volunteers assembled quickly. The caving community responds rapidly to emergencies. A coordinated plan was developed. 4 rescuers would return to the lips area to continue searching passages accessible from that entrance, while 4 more would enter through the main commercial entrance to search the organ lips connection, the passages that linked different sections of the cave system. The second team, entering through the commercial entrance, moved systematically through the passages and checking likely locations where lost cave explorers might end up. They worked their way through the connection passages, calling out, listening, shining lights into side passages and chambers. In the Handley room area, they finally found them. The 2 teenagers had spent the entire night underground. Unlike their 6 companions, who had at least stayed together in the maze, this pair had traveled deep into the cave system before settling near the register to wait. The cold had been relentless. The cave temperature that feels cool during an active caving trip becomes agonizing when you're sitting still for hours. Hypothermia had set in gradually, the shivering that eventually stops as the body's core temperature drops, the mental fog, the desperate need for warmth. In their desperation, they had done something that made the rescuers' hearts sink. They had burned the cave register, the logbook that served as a safety tool for all cave explorers who visited this section of the cave. The register that documented who had been here and when had been torn apart and set alight, its pages consumed to provide brief moments of heat and light. The rescuers found them huddled near the remains of the fire, traumatized by their overnight ordeal, suffering from exposure, but alive. They were guided out through the passages, finally emerging into daylight around 10 a.m. Monday morning, approximately 24 hours after they had entered the cave on Sunday afternoon, the 8 teenagers had entered Organ Cave expecting an afternoon of exploration. Instead, 6 of them spent hours trapped in darkness with only a cigarette lighter, slowly freezing, one of them sliding toward diabetic crisis. 2 others spent an entire night deep in the cave system, so desperate for warmth that they destroyed a safety register to burn for heat. All 8 emerged alive, but traumatized by an experience that should never have happened. The cause wasn't a cave collapse or a flood or getting lost in Virgin Passage. The cause was simple, preventable negligence. They had entered an extensive cave system without adequate backup lights. The 8 teenagers had violated this fundamental rule, and the consequences had nearly proved fatal. Monday morning, the cave would forever represent something different. A place where darkness became absolute, where cold seeped into your bones, where hours stretched into eternity, and where the simple failure to pack backup flashlights nearly cost them their lives.